Are the Misfits the first pop punk band? Because, dude, I'm telling you, if you just recorded them a little better and didn't sound like Elvis, you'd have Blink 182 on a lot of these songs. I was listening to these songs and I kept getting a specific melody and a specific feel from really early Misfits music. And I've always thought of the Ramones as the first pop punk band. But they're widely considered just a punk rock band. Are the Misfits the first pop punk band? Because, dude, I'm telling you, if you just recorded them a little better and didn't sound like Elvis, you'd have Blink 182 on a lot of these songs. Not all of them, but a lot of them. What do you think about that? How do you feel about the Misfits being the first pop punk band?
I think the Ramones could keep the title because the Misfits took so much from the Ramones. Like the Misfits, one of the early criticisms of them was that they were a Ramones knockoff. Like they were literally went to see the Ramones and started a band. Like they are the band with that story in the first run of it. So I would say, yeah, they're extremely influential, obviously, and you can argue like influence-wise. I think that can be an actual debate, but I still think as we knew it and as it came to be, the Ramones did create pop punk. I think
I didn't
have
even
a slight edge there.
While I think I do agree with you, I just thought it was interesting because the Ramones, while they are, in my personal opinion, the originators of that sound, and they do have a lot of pop influence. Boy, I tell you, man, the Misfits have almost all pop influence. It's just a little bit sped up, dude. They've got like 50s pop songs. The Ramones is all fast. It's got a punk attitude to it. And the Misfits do sometimes, but the Misfits got some swanky, slow jams, dude. I don't remember the Ramones ever having any of that. And I forgot about the fact that they went and saw the Ramones and then like went and started the Misfits. It just kind of passed through my brain. But yeah, I just thought it was an interesting thing we should at least bring up as a point of conversation, because all these bands that we think of up until like the 90s, a lot of them are just covering pop and R&B songs from the 50s, not actually covering them, but you know what I'm saying, like
replicating
playing,
yeah.
And like even if you listen to bands like Blood for Blood, they literally do cover 60s pop and R&B ballads. They literally do that. A lot of hardcore punk bands get their style and their melodies, their simple chord progressions from that era and from that kind of music. And so the Misfits are an early example of what pop punk could have been. I mean, it's weird, man, because the only stuff that I think the difference is that you have stuff like Oi and street punk that come out, or else everything would be pop punk, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, I think it's the two strands though too, right? It's you have the Ramones strand, you have the Pistol strand, and I think everything else kind of divides off of that. And it's funny because, like, again, the Misfits are way more directly on the Ramones side of the ledger, but I think a lot of the street and the Oi stuff probably owes its roots a little bit more, a lot to the Ramones too in New York specifically, but a lot to the UK stuff and to the Sex Pistols. So there is that divide. I think like similar to the Ramones, the Misfits are an extremely American band. Like they are very, very American. Like their identity is very, very American, and the whole idea of their band, kind of similar to the Ramones, is a takeoff of a piece of American pop culture from years past. And that is the spirit of punk. I mean, Johnny Ramone said it all the time. He wasn't trying to, they weren't trying to create punk. They were just trying to do rock and roll like they grew up on, not the rock and roll that was on the chart, not the Jefferson Airplane and stuff like that at the time. And so that's why it's more in common with like the Beach Boys than it is with like a Jefferson Airplane. And that's really the lineage is really at, that traditional rock and roll in that kind of way.
I think a lot of people forget about the fact that punk rock is just an offshoot of rock and roll, because I was listening to AC/DC like voluntarily. I just was in the mood for it. And so I was listening to some of their older material, and I added a couple of songs to the punk rock review playlist. And I thought these fit with anything that sounds remotely like One Man Army, the Briggs, the Menzingers, all that stuff, dude. Any of that dad punk stuff, that's all that is rock and roll. And so I think a lot of people forget about that, or they don't mention it enough, or whatever. Anyways, it wasn't something I wanted to spend a ton of time on, but I thought it was an interesting topic that they sounded so poppy. Like you think the Misfits and you think dark, you think Halloween, you think horror movies, you think kind of gnarly and a little gruesome, but you don't think swanky 50s pop. You know what I'm saying? But in reality, you should.
Well, and that's why they have the connection. Like, if you can play a Misfits song, then you can play a Blink-182 song like a few weeks later, because they're basically the same thing. And in fact, one thing where I think the Misfits are more similar to like Blink-182 and those later bands is they have the odd rhythms in their songs, where the Ramones have that difficult to replicate pace, but it's very straightforward. It's not necessarily odd. It's very straightforward, where the innovation that the Misfits really had, and I think it was somewhat because they couldn't keep time with each other, and they would have these odd time things that are so common in.
That's what I was going to say. Is that they were just kind of bad musicians, and it ended up evolving music a little bit by just accident.
It did, and we talked about before how that stereotype doesn't really work with punk, except for on early punk. And now we're talking about a band though that goes all the way back to the 70s and did most of the damage in the early era. We're just happen to be more famous in their later eras. It's just a weird career that they have had. And there's no one else like that. Yeah,
interesting career.